The potential for redrawing New York's congressional boundaries before the 2030 census has been promoted by Democratic lawmakers and liberal activists for months now as they explore how to create a larger edge in the Empire State's congressional delegation. But those efforts have gotten a newfound level of enthusiasm and energy recently in the wake of a U.S. Supreme Court ruling this spring in a voting rights case that has prompted red states to revisit how their lines are drawn, potentially eliminating blue seats. For more on the potential response in New York, where Democratic lawmakers are considering a handful of constitutional amendments to the redistricting process, we're joined by Senate Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris, a Queens Democrat who is one of the leading voices on New York's redistricting efforts. Welcome back to the show, Leader.
Dave, I feel misled. I thought I was coming to review the LCA show last night.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm emotionally stable enough for that type of critique at this point.
5 stars.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
For you. Bruce Blakeman, not so much.
Okay. Well, I want to talk first about the door that's been open with this U.S. Supreme Court ruling. What is it about its impact on the voting rights laws of the country that could potentially give you wiggle room to draw lines in a way that you and other states might not have prior to this ruling?
I would say the door was kicked down. The door was open when Texas and Florida and some other Republican states decided to redraw their congressional lines mid-decade. That was typically, by practice, not done. Some states it's forbidden, like here in New York. And so we'd begun exploring the possibility of allowing New York to do something similar so that we can fight fire with fire, if you will. And then in the midst of that process, the Calais decision came out, which essentially is telling the states in the South, which are predominantly red, that they can eliminate districts that were Voting Rights Act protected districts designed to give minority populations, black in particular in the South, more political representation. And so we're already seeing Louisiana and some other states take steps to now eliminate specifically black members of Congress who happen to be Democrats and draw the lines in a way that will elect Republicans. So it's this combination of doing it off cycle, which is happening, and this decision, which gives states the legal authority to do it more aggressively and in a racially discriminatory fashion, that is creating this tempest that is forcing us to consider our options.
Well, here in New York, you mentioned some of the southern states and the districts that have been created in the past to give a voice to some of the ethnic and racial minorities there. We actually have districts, in New York City, for example, where those types of districts are actually drawn. So do New York Democrats have an interest in reshaping those boundaries?
I don't think we need to. I've been asked that question before. And really what the question is, when you break it down, is are you willing to dilute minority political power to achieve Democratic Party political power? And I don't think we are willing to do that. I don't think we need to do that. We have the ability. Now, mind you, these are all, no matter how you redraw those districts, they're going to be Democrat, right? Because these are very solidly blue areas surrounded by other solidly blue areas. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to manipulate the maps to that extent, you'd have to really get creative and capture some of these minority vote and attach it to communities that are really unrelated to those neighborhoods. And so it would be something that I think would also, at a time when minority communities are facing an assault on their political power because they're going to lose members from the South, potentially as many as a dozen, to have a state like New York contribute to that, I think would be a mistake. But let me get back to why we don't need to do that. I think if we just draw maps that are fair and even in compliance with the existing standards we have, that we can achieve the goal of responding to what these Republican states are doing. We can probably net 3 or 4 seats here in New York just by drawing maps that take into consideration the communities and are done in a quote-unquote fair manner. So remember, these lines are not drawn by the legislature, the existing lines. I mean, they were, but ultimately based on the fact that a special master drew them to begin with.
Yeah, you definitely guys got your hands on the final product.
We did, but ultimately, look at the map that we initially presented, right? Very different. And I think that would have yielded very different result. Now we had this corrupt court decision that has been partially dealt with, but we had a chief judge that has resigned in disgrace since that time. We have a new chief judge who actually wrote the dissent in that opinion. So I think we're dealing with a very different legal landscape. But we have the ability, I think, if we just comply with the existing guideposts that we have, to achieve the goals that we're seeking and to be responsive to what's happening in the rest of the country without having to chop up black districts.
You mentioned that word of fair, and when it comes to redistricting, though, there are various points of view on what the best way to approach boundaries are. For some people, it's that eye test. You want the most compact district. For others, it's communities of interest. For others, they say it should be a purple district to the best of your ability so that you have competitive elections. What does fair mean to you other than giving the Democrats an edge to the best ability?
Well, we have a series of standards laid out in the Constitution as to what are supposed to be kind of the guiding principles of drawing these maps. And we then should have this process where people, whether it's the commission members of the independent commission or ultimately the legislature, decide on how to put maps in place that comply with those standards. And so the problem with that original court decision, Harkenrider, I believe it was, is that it said that the legislature and the IRC have no role in this process. They handed it to some professor in Pennsylvania who knows nothing about New York communities. So,
not that you're bitter about it.
I am bitter about it because it was completely out of bounds, and the decision itself was unconstitutional. Now, the court has since then, in the second decision, said that was a mistake. Well, they didn't say it that way. They said it was a one-time deal, and that the commission process is the one that should have been. Like, if you find something wrong with the maps, which a court is entitled to do in evaluating the standards, the remedy is send it back to the process so that the same players have the chance to fix it. That's what happened in the second round. But like I said, the deviation from the master's map was minimal at that point.
So before we move on, let me reintroduce you for listeners just joining us. I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with Senate Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris, a Queens Democrat. So the current constitutional language makes a reference to not favoring or disfavoring incumbents or other particular candidates or political parties. There are a variety of potential constitutional amendments on the table for Democratic lawmakers here in Albany to consider. Is that language something that you think will be changed, or do you think it is worth preserving?
Well, ultimately, the people will decide what they want changed, right?
But you guys will put forth a referendum.
So the deciders here are the voters of the state, ultimately. As your listeners are astute enough to know, the process of changing the Constitution requires us to pass an amendment proposal, pass it again after a subsequent election, and then it goes on the ballot for voter approval. And so we can achieve what we call first passage this year. If we do it before the session ends, that's going to be the next 2 weeks. And because the landscape is shifting so quickly, we just saw, as we mentioned earlier, the dynamics are rapidly moving from, worrying about a state or two changing their lines and an off cycle to a Supreme Court decision that's completely upended the entire process. The thought is perhaps we want to pass 2 or 3 options that then the legislature next year can consider in deciding which one they want to place on the ballot likely in November of 27. And so there's been a myriad of ideas floated as to what those options should be. Right now we're in the midst of the budget process, as you know. So once we finish that,
you guys walk and chew gum, though.
We definitely can, but it is a tight time frame. The whole session wraps up 2 weeks from tomorrow, right? In theory. So we have a lot of work to do to figure out which are the ones we want to preserve as options for the next legislature to consider. A legislature I won't be a part of, by the way. So I want to make sure this process this year gives my future my current colleagues who are there in the future, plus whoever will enter next year, a menu of options for them to decide what they want to do.
Is that something, though, that should be on the menu, so to speak, that ending those restrictions that are designed to prevent sort of partisan gerrymandering?
It's hard to answer that with a yes or no answer because there's some school of thought that it should be contingent, right? That if other states are engaging in this process, that's when our standard should change so that we can respond in kind, as opposed to just a blanket removal. Others say let's just tackle this process, which is broken clearly, and reform it top to bottom right now. The IRC was designed for gridlock. When I was the deputy minority leader, my whole conference, and I walked out rather than cast the vote in favor of this commission because we said exactly what would happen, and it happened. So our prediction was incredibly accurate. We said you're putting 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans in this body. Guaranteed they're not going to agree. And that's what happened. And then built into this decision that the court made was this idea that if they don't agree and they don't meet to disagree, therefore the legislature doesn't have the right to do anything, even though the Constitution says the legislature shall have the ability to draw lines when the commission doesn't. And so we need to fix that process if you want it done right. And the question is, do you want to just tackle a very narrow problem, which is states drawing off cycle? Do you want to tackle the problem posed by the Calais decision, which would be a little bit more expansive? Or do you want to tackle the entire problem with the IRC to begin with? And so that's what we have to figure out the next couple of weeks.
Why the next couple of weeks? Why not say, let's do the regular run of business in the time that we have left for the scheduled session and use any time in the next 6 months prior to December 31st to make a fun trip back in here to Albany. We're great in September, October, November, you choose, and vote on potential new lines then, or a new process then.
It's certainly something that could happen, but I don't
think... like me hitting like a 3/4 jump shot with Wemby in front of me?
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, if he's in front of you may not be able to do it. But
I'm trying to really demonstrate the odds here, Senator.
I mean, look, we have to pass first passage sometime before the end of the year, calendar year, right? So any of that can happen, but we're here. I don't think much is going to change in terms of our ability to choose options and make decisions between now and the next couple of months. So we might as well tackle it while we're here, is the thought. So I think sometime post-budget, pre-end of session, you'll see some amendment proposals.
That might be a very tiny little window, though.
It's going to be very tiny, yes.
Are you concerned at all, though, that the redistricting amendments that you might consider, if you do multiple, are going to basically limit your ability to take on other legislation, given the likelihood of robust debate in both houses on all of these potential amendments?
Yes, very much so. The window is narrower than it's ever been. We typically pass hundreds, if not thousands, of bills in the last couple of weeks, and we're going to have basically 5 session days to do all of that work. So we're trying to prioritize what needs to happen. I think there's some bills we call must-dos, like either there's sunsets that are expiring, or like I would put the redistricting amendments in the category of a must-do, something we have to pass this year. And so we'll tackle those first. Then we've got member priorities, which cover everything that we would ever legislate that need to be considered. And so it's a lot of work to do in a short amount of time, but we'll figure it out. Some late nights, I'm sure.
How important is it that in the process of crafting something, you do craft something that you can sell successfully to New York voters? Because it's one thing, right, to come up with a process that's going to give you every single Democratic district, and it's another one to pass something that voters will approve, and you don't see a repeat of the 2021 referendums where there was efforts to change voting laws and they failed.
Yes, how important is it? It's all important. Because if a referendum doesn't pass, then we did all that work for nothing.
So it's front of mind then as you're doing this.
We want to come up with something that people support and that people get behind. And I think you referenced the 21 amendments. The landscape has changed pretty dramatically. And I think you see that in California and Virginia and other states that have now, because of the nature of their state process, had to have referendums to change their maps. And both of those states had effective campaigns that led to those amendments being passed. The previous amendment in New York didn't really have a robust campaign behind it. It was just kind of thrown on there. There wasn't this national discussion about the consequences of the changing political landscape and the Supreme Court decisions and what other states are doing. And all those factors coming together would lead me to believe that it's more fertile ground now than it was then. And based on what we've seen in these other states, I expect there will be very expensive, very robust campaigns run once we get to that point.
Well, you're looking at a potential odd year referendum, again, where we typically would have low turnout, even lower turnout now since we've seen a change to when some municipal elections are held. So what would you want to see from, I imagine, the Democratic State Party or national Democrats in terms of the back that they would put into some sort of campaign like this?
And by the way, I'm sure the other side will also lean into this.
As they did in 2021 successfully.
Right. It was one-sided back then because we didn't have our side engaged in the fight.
Senate Democrats waged a little bit at the end. You guys tried.
We did what we could, but it's not really our role to do that. But we tried to do it regardless. I think you're going to see a $100 million campaign.
Wow.
That's what it was in these other states. And New York is as expensive as anywhere else when it comes to this sort of thing, with media ad rates and mailers and people on the ground hitting doors. And I just see when we run a Senate campaign that's competitive, we're at $1.5 million, $2 million for just our side. Imagine this a statewide effort. So it's not, it would not be unexpected.
And lastly, you mentioned the idea of picking up potentially a handful of seats at the top of the interview. And top of mind, I think of Nicole Maliotakis in Staten Island, Brooklyn. And then you have 2 GOP seats right now on Long Island, maybe one of those. Where else are you potentially eyeballing a pickup? And is it a pickup based solely on geography, or do you have candidates in mind for 2028 or 2030 where you think you can actually take advantage of?
No one has put pen to paper to try and draw maps at this point, but if you're asking
why would you get a whole court issue in the future?
If you're asking me where are the competitive areas of the state, certainly Brooklyn and Staten Island and Brooklyn would be among them. Long Island is an area we are always fighting over, just in the state Senate, and up into the Hudson Valley, which has been trending more Democratic as time has gone on. And so I think that's where you'd see probably the bulk of the action. Upstate, beyond that, it's really the cities that tend to have the likelihood of electing Democrat, and I think that they're already represented by Democrats in those areas.
Well, we've been speaking with Senate Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris. He's a Queens Democrat. Senator, thank you so much for making the time.
Thanks, Dave.
Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell and Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.